The sea was colder than it should have been, and the blue stretched on forever beneath him. Yuri sank further and further, disoriented, the weight of the water pressing down in ways he hadn't anticipated. His buoyancy compensator felt wrong. The weight of his camera pulled him deeper than he intended. He checked his gauge again. He was almost 260 feet down, too deep. He thought about his descent, about his buddy far above, but the thoughts slipped away as easily as they came. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that something was shifting inside of his body. The water, once a cool embrace, now felt like a weight on his chest, thick, suffocating. His breath came faster, shallower. The narcosis began, just as the books said it would. The dizziness, the loss of clarity. His hands were slow to respond to his regulator as he adjusted it. He tugged harder, trying to find some focus. The hole beneath him yawned, welcoming him in, waiting for him. Yuri had always been drawn to the deep. Ever since he was a boy, he loved diving. Now, at 22 years old, he'd spent years training, countless hours in the pool, pushing his limits, testing his gear, diving into the open ocean. There was something about the vastness, the darkness below, that made him feel alive. And now his sights were set on a dive that promised to take him farther than he'd ever gone before. The blue hole. To Yuri, it was the crown jewel of diving, an enormous underwater sinkhole visible from above as a dark, deep blue circle in the vibrant ocean. The hole, over 300 feet deep and nestled into the Red Sea, was formed during past ice ages when lower sea levels carved out the limestone. As waters rose, it became a submerged dark void, accessible from the shore and known as the Dahab Blue Hole. Enclosed at the top by a structure called the saddle, which stifles any currents within, this location only had a faint current at the entrance. Sure, many divers had died there, but to Yuri, that only meant that the challenge was real. 2 weeks of training. That was what Tarek Omar had said when they met. You need to prepare. The blue hole isn't like other dives. But Yuri had heard that too often before. Warnings, cautions, barriers. They were things for other people, things that didn't apply to him. Tarek had been diving the blue hole for years. He was first drawn to it in 1992, lured by the whispers of a curse, a legend as old as the desert itself. The tale spoke of a woman who drowned there, forced into an arranged marriage that she had never wanted. Some said her spirit still lingered beneath the surface, pulling others down to share her fate. But for Tarek, it wasn't just the myth that kept him coming back. He felt something deeper, an obsession, a need to understand the blue hole's secrets, to explore its lethal depths, to push further than any diver dared, and to find out what lay waiting in the dark below. In 1997, his name had become synonymous with the place where he retrieved the bodies of 2 divers. Over the years, he pulled more than 20 bodies from the blue hole, earning the grim nickname the Bone Collector. But Yuri didn't think about Tarek, or about the history or the curse. With only a weekend in town, Yuri didn't have time for training. He didn't have time to slow down. There was only one thing on his mind. The Arch, an 85 feet long tunnel that descends into the open sea. Yuri could feel it calling to him, promising something beyond what he had ever experienced. He didn't need 2 weeks. He didn't need anyone's help. He could already feel the excitement of the dive coursing through him as he checked his equipment again. His movements methodical, the familiar routine grounding him in the moment. Buoyancy compensator, regulator, tanks. His fingers moved with practiced precision, tightening straps, twisting valves, adjusting depth gauges. Every motion was second nature, honed by years of experience. This wasn't his first deep dive, but this one was different. It was the dive that would define him. Out of the corner of his eye, Yuri caught a glimpse of the memorial plaques lining the shore, silent reminders of those who had never resurfaced. But to him, they felt distant, irrelevant. With a steady hand, he adjusted his mask, flicked a switch on his gear, and stepped forward. The water lapped at his ankles, then his waist, then his chest. He inhaled deeply, the cold air burning in his lungs, grounding him in the moment. This was it. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. He slipped into the water, the coolness of the ocean surrounding him, the weight of it pressing in. The water was clearer than Yuri had imagined, the sun's rays piercing through the surface and scattering like broken glass as he descended. Yuri exhaled slowly, watching the bubbles rise around him, floating to the surface, vanishing into the world above. He could feel the weight of the water, the pressure increasing as he descended. But it felt right, and this was where he belonged. This was what he had trained for. He felt the thrill building within him as he sank deeper, the light from the surface growing fainter. The water felt perfect as he adjusted his fins and kicked toward the depths. The weight of his camera pressing against his chest seemed trivial. Everything was going as planned. The landscape around him began to shift subtly as he sank, from the vivid blues of the water shifting to darker hues. A shadowed underwater cathedral formed around him, limestone walls rising on either side, enclosing him within their skeletal fingers. Yuri could see everything, as if the water had somehow washed away the fog in his mind. Every moment felt sharper, every color more vivid. Fish darted in and out of view. The gentle pull of the current nudged him forward, almost like it was guiding him. At 98 feet, the world began to change again. The deeper he went, the more the blue consumed everything. It wasn't just a color anymore, it was a presence, a weight pressing against him, seeping into his skin. It felt almost suffocating. With each meter, his body grew heavier, the familiar resistance of the water and now an unseen force pulling him down. His air supply was thinning faster than expected, but he didn't worry. A quiet reassurance settled over him. Everything was fine. The arch was just ahead waiting for him. Yuri could see the entrance now, a gaping maw in the side of the blue hole. The current was weak at the surface, but there was no resistance now. No push of water in his face. Everything was calm. Everything was perfect. But then, something changed. At 195 feet, his buoyancy compensator didn't respond. He twisted the valve, feeling the familiar click, but nothing happened. The subtle tension that had started to gather at the back of his mind grew tighter, and a small but unsettling feeling crept in. He tugged at the valve again. Still, the water didn't change, and the weight of the camera around his neck seemed to drag him deeper. The walls of limestone closed in, the arch within reach, but Yuri felt a growing unease. The clarity of the water around him began to distort, edges growing blurry like the softening edges of a dream. He reached for his gauge, almost 230 feet, too deep. His breath started to quicken. Yuri told himself, relax, this was fine. Just a little deeper, just a little further. The narcosis was setting in, just as the books had warned. But Yuri didn't feel drunk, not yet. There was no rush of euphoria, no false sense of invincibility that made divers think they could do anything. No, this was something else. It crept in slowly, silently, like a fog rolling over his mind. A strange disconnect settled in between his thoughts and his body. What was real? What wasn't? The lines were beginning to blur, his awareness softening at the edges. He could hear his breath coming faster now, each inhale and exhale sharper, louder. But somehow it didn't seem to matter. The steady rise and fall of his chest was just a sound, distant and detached, a rhythm he no longer controlled. His thoughts fractured, slipping through his mind, impossible to hold on to. He reached for his buoyancy compensator again, hoping to stop the descent, but his hands felt slow and uncoordinated. His fingers fumbled with the valve, but the device didn't respond. The world around him was changing. He could see the arch now, its shadows beckoning him forward, but each movement felt slow and heavy. His regulator was still in his mouth, but his breath was erratic, too fast, too shallow. The world was pressing in. The pressure was building in his chest, and then something else, something even stranger, began to take hold. His limbs felt heavy, like the water was thickening around him, dragging him down. His chest tightened, the cold wrapping itself around his lungs like an icy vice. He was having trouble breathing now. Was his equipment faulty? Maybe it was the depth. Yuri tried to adjust his buoyancy again, but his fingers fumbled. Nothing. His heart began to pound. Panic was overtaking him. The tunnel loomed just ahead, but it felt like a lifetime away. The deeper he went, the harder it was to separate his thoughts from the sensation of the water around him. His mind was spinning in circles. The oxygen in his tank was starting to feel like it wasn't enough. Or maybe it wasn't the oxygen at all, but something else, something more dangerous. Oxygen toxicity? No, that didn't make sense, not at this depth. Yuri saw a light ahead, shimmering softly in the deep, but it wasn't the surface. Whatever it was, it felt like it was calling to him. A whisper of reason told him to stop, to turn back, but his mind was spiraling, slipping. He had read about this, trained for it in theory, but nothing could have prepared him for how it actually felt. Time unraveled. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours. The world around him became unrecognizable, warped, distant, unreal. Focus, he told himself. He tried to twist the buoyancy valve again, but nothing happened. His limbs were sluggish now, slow to respond. The water was no longer just cold, it was suffocating. His chest felt tight, compressed by the pressure of the ocean around him. He couldn't take a full breath. Every inhale was shallow and sharp. His head spun, the world around him tilting as his body struggled to adjust. He kicked harder, but the ocean seemed to drag him deeper, pulling him toward the hole beneath him. The arch. That was the goal. If he could just make it there. At 295 feet, Yuri's surroundings blurred, his senses becoming disconnected from his body. His heartbeat raced in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. His chest pain intensified, the sharp, jagged ache growing with every shallow breath. He could feel his lungs struggling, gasping for air that never seemed to come. Panic crept in again, but it was muted, distant. His thoughts were no longer in order. Up, go up. He kicked again, but his legs felt weighted. His body wasn't responding, not the way it should have. He glanced at his gauge, but the numbers blurred, unreadable. Only 8 minutes into the dive, his body was already betraying him. His limbs felt weak, uncoordinated, as if they no longer belonged to him. The regulator was still in his mouth, but panic flickered in the back of his mind. He couldn't make his body work. His hand reached for it again, but his fingers slipped. Too numb, too slow. The water around him felt thicker now, heavier, like the ocean had a hold of him, refusing to let him go. The narcosis had set in, just as they said it would. His thoughts were fragmented, disjointed, floating away like the bubbles in the water. He tried to grab his buoyancy compensator again, but his fingers slipped. Fumbling with the strap, the valve, nothing worked the way it should. The harder he tried, the more frustrated he became, and the more disconnected he felt from everything. Yuri began to feel dizzy. The pain in his chest was no longer just physical, it felt like his very mind was breaking apart. His head spun, and he couldn't hold on to anything. His vision flickered in and out, light, dark, light again, but nothing was clear. He kicked harder, trying to rise, but the effort felt futile. The arch had once seemed within reach, but now it seemed like a distant memory, lost in the endless dark. He tried to reach for something, anything, to steady himself, but his hands were useless, floating aimlessly in the water. By minute 12, the hallucinations began. First, it was just the flickers of light, sharp and blinding. He squinted, but it didn't help. Then shapes, dark shadows that seemed to loom in the water, moving in ways that didn't make sense. The arch was gone, replaced by something else. The water itself felt alive, swirling around him, dragging him down. Yuri tried to swim, but his limbs felt like they didn't belong to him. His body had become a stranger, and he no longer had control over it. His thoughts were like pieces of a broken puzzle. The pressure in his chest was unbearable. His breath came in short, shallow gasps that never seemed enough. His hands were numb now, useless. His legs were still, floating in the current. His body drifted aimlessly as the world around him shifted between clarity and darkness. By minute 20, Yuri was no longer fighting. His eyes flickered open and closed, his vision a blur of light and dark. His thoughts had stopped, his body floating in the blackness. The arch, the surface, the cold, they all seemed so far away. Tarek's phone rang in the early hours of the morning. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered it anyway. Hello? The voice on the other end was tight with panic, barely holding itself together. Are you the one they call the bone collector? Tarek felt the weight of the question before it even landed. It was a name he hadn't asked for, but it had followed him for years. He didn't like it, but it was his. Yes, Tarek answered quietly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. There was a brief pause, and then the voice continued, trembling. I need you to find my son. His name is Yuri. He went into the blue hole yesterday, and he hasn't come back. Please, you're the only one who can help. Tarek closed his eyes, the words sinking deep. He swallowed the knot in his throat. He agreed, the words barely escaping. The line went quiet, and then, thank you. Please, bring him back. The woman whispered and ended the call. Tarek stared at the phone in his hand, his heart pounding. The room felt smaller now, heavy with the weight of the promise he had just made. Yuri's mother needed her son. There was no turning back. Later that morning, Tarek stood at the shoreline, the ocean stretching before him. He adjusted his gear with steady hands, the sun casting long shadows on the sand. He had done this so many times before, diving into the blue hole to recover bodies, bringing closure to the families who never expected to face such a loss. Another dream that had turned into a tragedy. He knew the odds of finding Yuri alive were slim, but there was no other choice. He had to look. With a deep breath, Tarek began his walk down to the water's edge. Each step in the sand felt like a step closer to something he couldn't control, but the moment had arrived. He slipped into the water, the cold seeping into his wetsuit. He adjusted his mask, tightened the straps on his tanks, and took one last steadying breath before he descended. The blue hole was waiting. As Tarek sank deeper, the water around him grew colder, more oppressive. His mind was heavy, weighed down with the knowledge of what he was searching for. The silence of the blue hole surrounded him as he retraced Yuri's path. At 300 feet, Tarek found him. Yuri's body was tangled in his equipment, caught in the descent line. The familiar sight of another lost diver sent a cold shiver through Tarek's body, and now Tarek had to bring him back. With steady hands, he secured Yuri's body, carefully lifting him and beginning the slow, sorrowful journey back to the surface. Each kick of his fins was harder than the last. 2 days later, Tarek arrived at Yuri's mother's house. He had come to do what he had promised, but there was no easy way to fulfill that promise. Yuri's mother was sitting in the living room waiting. She walked toward a small table by the window. Resting there was a bag that Tarek recognized, one filled with Yuri's belongings, the gear he had worn on his last dive. She placed it on the table in front of him, and that's when he saw it, the camera. Tarek picked it up carefully, almost cautiously, expecting it to be broken. After all, he had found it at 380 feet, far beyond its designed depth. It should have been crushed, but somehow it was still intact. He hesitated, then turned it on. The screen flickered to life, casting a dim glow in the darkened room. Tarek's breath caught as the footage began to play. Grainy, distorted, and silent. There was Yuri, his hands fumbling with the regulator, his movements slow, clumsy, confusion setting in, the abyss swallowing him whole. Tarek couldn't look away, but he wanted to. Beside him, Yuri's mother didn't speak, but her face tightened, her eyes filled, the grief spilling over as she watched the final moments of her son's life. It was unbearable. Tarek turned away, but it was too late now. She had seen it, and now she would always have it, the last minutes of her son's life captured in cold, unflinching clarity. The room was still. Tarek couldn't say anything more. There were no words left. All he could do was look at Yuri's mother, her face expressionless, the grief too much to carry. And as the blue hole continued to call to those who came after, Tarek couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever learn the lesson so brutally taught. The deep always takes, but it never gives. What do you think about the blue hole's deadly reputation? Do you believe it's just the result of dangerous diving conditions, or is there something more to the legend? Let us know in the comments below. Now go check out Most Brutal Death in History, Gollum's Cave, or click on this video instead.